if I tell you that I'm coming up with something where a guy finds a treasure map, you're like, okay, well, that's been done, but it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then we say, okay, who's this character? Maybe he's somebody who's afraid to go outside. Maybe he has phobias. So it's like, for that storyline, who can we make this person into that's going to have the biggest experience over the adventure?
This is the Faith and Family Filmmakers Podcast, helping filmmakers who share a Christian worldview stay in touch, informed, and inspired. Quiet on set. Rolling. Your hosts, Jeffrey and Jaclyn Witt.
You're listening to the Faith and Family Filmmakers Podcast. My name is Jaclyn, and today I have Shelly here with me, Shelly Paino. This is the second interview, and so if you want to get to know Shelly, you can go back and listen to her first interview. But I want to get into some writing strategies. At the end of the last interview, we started talking about minor characters and writing minor characters in a way that makes them interesting. And for example, you wrote a specific character in a project that was a minor character, but you wrote him in a way that made him unpredictable and interesting, and it attracted an actor. Is that something that you keep in mind when you're writing?
I do now. I didn't always, especially when it is a minor character, but that's where you can kind of play with somebody's personality. I got that advice one time. I was writing a romantic comedy, and the male was the main character, and the love interest, when somebody else read it, they said, "You haven't written this to attract an A-lister. What are they going to see in this role? What is the love interest going to see in this role that they want to play this?" And I hadn't thought of that. I was focusing on the main character. So I think brainstorming comes into it so much. You can just throw 100 things at the wall. What if he's this?
Right.
What if he's that? What if she, and I think in that one, I had this whole thing with her dad who was gone now. And he said, look for somebody funny. And she ends up falling in love with a comedian. But she's very serious. So there was a lot to explore there where I had left it unexplored before. So I think brainstorming comes in so much more than I ever thought it did. And I can tell when I don't do enough of it, when somebody reads something and they kind of say, well, what about this? And I'm like, I never got into that person's past and their personality. This person who I'm writing comes with a whole past and experiences. So can I make them weird? Can I make them super serious? Can I, it's to explore all the options, because it might be the 10th one that you go, oh, that could be really fun. And, and all of a sudden it's writing itself at that point.
Yeah, I definitely do the same thing. My writing mentor told me something very similar. He told me, you want to write to attract a good actor, right?
Right.
And especially, when you're starting out as a writer and potentially moving into producing something of your own, if you can write something that would attract an actor to be willing to work for a lower rate, because they just love the role, that's moving your project way further ahead, not only because you're actually attracting a good actor, but because that means that the project is probably going to be better received and be able to get distribution and stuff. So it helps the whole thing along just from the writing process. If you can write in a way that would attract actors, because then most likely it's also going to attract an audience.
Right.
So let's kind of talk about some different strategies for how we do that. I'll start with one that I focus on is when I know that I have an actor or a character, let's say, a character that is going to be in the same location throughout the entire story. I definitely want to write that character to be a character that would attract a bigger named actor. The reason is because when it's filming, if all of that character's scenes are in one location, that means that they're going to film them all at the same time. And so bringing in that bigger actor means that they're going to be on set for 1, maybe 2 days, So they're spread throughout the movie. So the audience isn't going to feel like, I only ever saw them twice, You want to see them throughout the movie, but, in that location, the fact that they're only ever in that one location. And so, of course, you have to write the character that it makes sense to be only in that location. Like maybe it's a coworker, so you only see them at work or something like that.
Right.
But then that it's going to be easier to afford to get somebody
Yes.
to fill that role. And I love writing roles where it's like, this character is at risk of stealing the entire show.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah,
That's what people are going to remember
exactly.
about. We very rarely remember the main plot line of a movie. We like all the other stuff, you know. The main plot line is just like the track that it
Mhm.
travels on, but it's all the other stuff that's going on and the
Yeah. And that's where all of the, any one-liners that could come out of it, it's going to come from those characters, not usually going to come from the main character.
right.
I mean, look at Princess Bride. Like, who is even the main character in that one? Like, if you
I
think about
know.
it, because there are so many characters that are so lovable and that you want to follow all of them,
Yes.
right? And there's so many one-liners that have come out of that movie. And just,
Mhm.
when you can write characters in a way that are going to be so memorable,
Yeah.
it's going to be gold, right?
And you don't even care who's the main character. I'm like, do I even still remember the plot? It was like he's
Yeah.
trying to start a war, or, he's in the war making business or something, but that's not what we remember. And I love a
Yeah.
quotable movie. We quote movies all the time in my house. It's like our
Yeah,
love
yeah.
language.
That's funny. So do you have any other strategies or things that you do for writing memorable characters?
I've gotten to work with a lot of actors in developing things. If they have an idea, I kind of, and I know I'm going to be writing it, we kind of go back and forth. And I was working with an actress recently, and I think we were trying to brainstorm together on the phone, and we were kind of getting our wires crossed and everything. I was like, what's happening right now? And I realized she's thinking of character first, and that writers don't do that. Writers think of story first. And she kept saying, who's the character? Who's the character? And I was like, I don't know yet, because I don't know what the
Mhm.
story is. We
Yeah.
have to figure out what the story is. Then I choose who that character is for that situation to make it the most interesting. So,
Mhm.
I just used a random example with somebody. I'm like, if I tell you that I'm coming up with something where a guy finds a treasure map, you're like, okay, well, that's been done, but it's interesting.
Mhm.
And then we say, okay, who's this character? Maybe he's somebody who's afraid to go outside. Maybe he has phobias. So it's like, for that storyline, who can we make this person into
Right.
that's going to have the biggest experience over the adventure?
Yeah,
So-
yeah. Like, what does it take in order for this adventure to happen? Okay, that's what this character is not good at.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And how are they going to be at the end? And how far away from that can I take them?
Yes.
So that what they do is stretching them so far.
Yeah, yeah.
And what you were talking about, I was just talking about this with somebody, that there have been actors who have won Oscars who were on the screen for less than 15 minutes. So
Yeah.
it's these minor roles that these actors can really dig into and do something amazing with.
Yeah, yeah. And giving them something that is a challenge, something that would get them to stretch themselves, right? Because like when you think about, say, for example, a rom-com, typically there's not a lot of room for how the leads are going to be portrayed. I mean, yeah, they have their own character, but you know that there's going to be this love interest and they're not going to like each other at first. And then they're going to be forced into a situation to spend time together. And then they're going to develop a respect and an appreciation for each other. And it'll work into, a love story in the end. Okay, there we go. But in order to, write something that would be to make that story something that's interesting and not just like there's the predictable pattern. Well, you already know the predictable pattern. You're in it for the characters, right? Like
Right.
a lot of movies in the beginning, first 10 minutes in a movie, most of the time, I already know exactly what's going to happen. So watching it all the way through, it's not about seeing if I'm right. It's watching how do they get there and enjoying the characters along the way. It really is about being able to connect with the characters and enjoy them, because most of the time, you know how it's going to end. Even if you're not exactly sure, you've got a pretty good sense. Like, okay, I know I'm watching a rom-com. doesn't matter that they hate each other right now. I know they're going to end up together.
Right.
The question is how.
Yeah.
And so then the how includes all of these other characters that are involved in the journey.
Yeah. And is this relatable? Do I know people that are like this? I've never written anybody based on somebody I know, but there's little fragments of probably everybody I know.
Oh, yeah.
And their experiences. When I'm brainstorming, it's like, okay, well, I can use my grandparents' divorce, which I wasn't even around for. I can use something that my best friend went through and what she told me about. Or, what if this person that I know who's very quirky was in this situation? So we do draw on things that we've been through. And
absolutely.
And I think that makes it relatable to people. It is real because it's real.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how we connect with the characters, even when they are extreme, and a lot of the time, the more extreme characters are more fun. But, another reason why I like to write very different characters is because then that way they all have their own voice.
Right.
And, when you can read a script and you don't even have to really pay attention to the character name, who's talking. You can hear them and you can actually pick out, there's been times where I have someone look at one of my scripts in an earlier draft and they tell me did you mean to write this other character here? Because this line doesn't sound like this character. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. That was supposed to be that one, not this one.
Yeah.
But they could tell because the characters had very distinct voices that when you accidentally write the wrong character name above the dialogue, it's obvious that's got to be a mistake. It's not that character talking. That's not how they talk.
Right. Yeah. And every character has a goal in a scene. I didn't think like that at the beginning either, but everybody who's participating, even if it's just, I'm trying to get this paper signed or I'm trying to leave for the day. So somebody always has a point of view and a thing that they're trying to do. And that's where the conflict comes from. I used to think of conflict like arguing, fighting. It's not that at all. It's just that this character wants this and another character is opposing them in some way, not even on purpose sometimes. So it's like, this person is talking to me and I'm trying to leave.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. So what other kind of tips or tricks or tools, what do you use to get a script to be the best that it can be so that it can win awards or get produced?
I have learned from my mistakes and I have written down questions that I ask myself about every script and every idea that I get. I put it through the gauntlet and it usually changes the idea. So when somebody else comes to me and they have an idea, I start putting it through this gauntlet and it starts to change and they start to get uncomfortable with that. But I'm doing this for a reason because I've written whole screenplays. For example, one of them, the first one is what's the hook? If you write an amazing film and film it, spend millions of dollars. But if people don't want to watch it based on what you said it was about, if they're not like, oh yeah, I want to watch that. And that's, just comes from pitching stuff to people before you write it. My next one is main character, what's their goal and what's the obstacle? I wrote an entire screenplay where the main character is just reacting to things that are happening to him. He doesn't have a goal. And I couldn't figure out, I kept rewriting it and rewriting it. And I finally figured this out. So yeah, you have to have basically a process that you take a story through before you just start writing fade in. I think that's why people get really excited about something and then they get partway through it and they're like, oh, wait. So I'm a fan of Save the Cat, but even, a lot of people, they don't like to beat sheet, but I do like to. I prep a lot and it saves me. It doesn't mean that I don't have to rewrite. I always have to rewrite. The rewriting is almost never done.
Right.
Which, anytime I start to be like, okay, now it's good. I'm like, I should know never to say that because there's always something else.
Right.
But yeah, just putting it through the paces and running it by other people and seeing if somebody else might see something that you don't see. So does your main character transform? Are there high stakes? I think I've written screenplays. I think the romantic comedy might have been one of them. It's like, well, what happens if they don't get together? Oh, well, plenty of fish in the sea.
I guess they just go back to their own lives. No problem.
Make a dating profile because that didn't work out.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it's just learning from the mistakes. I even got asked recently when I pitched a movie that I had written, they said, well, what's the takeaway? And I did have an answer, but I almost didn't. So it's like, I asked
Right.
myself that. What other movies is it like? I asked myself that one because people are going to want comps. And you don't want to write
Yeah,
it and then be
exactly.
trying to find comps. You want to write a movie that is similar to something that did really well so that you can say, it's like this, but a little bit different. And then already they're
Right.
thinking, because the people you're going to pitch it to are going to have to sell it, not only to the actors, but to the audience and to the funders, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you got to be thinking like a producer when you're writing it, which a lot of people are like, but it's
Absolutely.
art. It is. But
It is, but it's not a hobby.
Exactly.
It's also a
Right.
business. Starting November 7, you can learn the foundations of story development for screenplays with me, Jaclyn Witt, in my 6-week mentorship class called Screenwriting Foundations. If you've been writing for a while but struggling to win awards or sell your work, or if you're new to screenwriting, Screenwriting Foundations will guide you through the process of writing a satisfying story that works for film. Plus, every student also receives a follow-up one-to-one mentorship call. Class size is limited to 8 students, so don't waste time. Learn more about my Screenwriting Foundations class at faffassociation.com. That's FAFF association.com. Also, the link is in the show notes. I like what you were saying about being organized and, whether you use Save the Cat or some other method, the point is to know where you're going, right? Like to get organized and make sure that you have all the pieces that you need in order to make it work before you dive in and start working. Because if you realize while you're in the middle of a project, oh, I actually don't have this piece of it, then you have to figure out how to rewrite it in a way that brings that into the story. And that can be very difficult. And I will say that from experience because that was my method for a long time because writing was a hobby for me. And so then I would just write what I wanted to write. And I didn't really think about, like, does this have to even be a good story? It was just, I like these characters and I like this situation. And so I'm going to write it. And
Right. I know.
so I just ran with it. And so that was definitely something I had to learn the process of getting organized before I sit down to write. But man, being organized, I can write so fast now.
Right.
Like now that I know these are the questions that I need to answer in order to know that I have a story that's going to work. Okay. Once I can answer those and then I write, like the writing practically writes itself because now I know all the things that I need to know. It's not like I'm sitting there watching it unfold in my brain and then typing it onto my computer and kind of figuring it out as I go. And I have written scripts that way, which means that I have rewritten multiple times.
Right.
Yeah.
Or sometimes just walked away. And I'm not fixing that.
Yeah, exactly. I have some where I'm like, you know what? I had fun writing it and that's not going to get rewritten because it's going to be such a mess to try to get back in there. And to be honest, some stories aren't really worth it in the end. I think it's important when you're a new writer to understand that the first few scripts that you write are most likely going to be a really good experience and exercise for you, but you may not have, the story itself may not have the depth that it needs in order to actually move into production and not to take that personally.
Right.
That's totally fine. Or you may have to rewrite it entirely in order to make it be something that would be worthy of producing. But I think it's important to go into writing with realistic expectations and to know that you don't necessarily have gold the first time you try something.
Right. It doesn't start out perfect.
Exactly. And that's where having, other writers to talk to and to share stuff back and forth, that's definitely going to help the process of improving your skills and even the process of giving feedback. Like when you and I started sharing scripts back and forth and you asked me for feedback on one of yours, it made me think differently, right? It made me put on a different hat. And so I was reading more objectively and it really taught me how to, how to see my own work that way as well.
Yeah. Somebody's going to read this.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Somebody's going to hopefully want to make this movie. Can I back up what I have put in here?
Yeah.
What I was thinking about too is that it's way easier to rewrite an outline than it is to rewrite an entire script.
It's so
And
true.
it's a lot less work. When it's in a short form, you can see the plot holes a little bit better or the drawbacks. So it does help to do that prep work.
Yeah, actually, people come to me sometimes to ask, like, because I do offer consultation. And so they ask, like, so should I come to you at the beginning or do you want me to write it first or whatever? And I'm like, okay, here's where I think the best bang for your buck is going to be. When you have your idea and you have written out your outline, or you at least are in the process of developing all of that, that's where you want to get your consultation. You want to make sure that your story is something that is ready to write. So that's where you want to get consultation then. And then you want to do your writing, your rewriting, your, sending back and forth to other writers. You want to do all of that work where you don't have to pay for it. And then once you have the best that you can come up with on your own with your other writing friends, like your script is the best that it could be, then you want to move on to getting the professional feedback as well, right? Because that's where you can get the best bang for your buck, because you don't need to pay somebody to tell you the things that your peer writers can tell you for free.
Right.
Like just
exactly.
Because the thing is, like, you can't necessarily address everything in one consultation. And so do you want me to address these other smaller issues, or do you want to address those on your own and then come to me with the bigger ones, So
Right. Like when you and your peer writers, which it's a give and take for sure, have gotten it as best that you can, then I do actually pay for a professional script consultation, because I just don't want to send it off to a producer and hear, well, the script's not ready. And I have heard that recently from a producer. So it's like, ouch.
Yeah. And I do the same thing too. And so this is kind of where, I'm kind of speaking to maybe newer writers or people that are wanting to break into the industry or whatever. Like, if this is the process that we go through, and you and I have already won awards, we've already gotten stuff produced, like we're already, at that level, and we're still going through this process of rewrite and rewrite and paying for feedback and stuff like that. So if you're competing in the same competitions that writers who are doing all of this level of work for, like, you need to step up your game and make sure that you're actually putting in that degree of work. And I'm not saying that to discourage anyone, but rather to give them a real heads up, that if you actually want to compete on that level, if this is going to be a business for you, if this is a passion that you're pursuing, that's what it's going to take.
Right. And I don't ever want to leave anything on the table.
Exactly.
I heard from a writers group I was a part of that a filmmaker group came to them and they wanted to show their short film to them. And they showed it. And these writers were like, oh, it's not good. But what do we say to them now? It's filmed.
Yeah, exactly. So it's done.
I don't ever want to watch something that I wrote and think to myself, I could have done more. I could have done better.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a little bit of perfectionism, and you can go too far with that where it can keep you from putting it out there into the world. But it's just always being open to another change. When I fight changing things or rewriting things, I try to tell myself every time I do a rewrite, as painful as it is, it results in a better script.
Yes.
And
sometimes for me, when I know I have to rewrite something and I have that tension and that resistance toward it, typically what I've discovered about myself, what that means is I need to take a break from it.
Yeah.
And I know that's not always possible. If you're on a deadline and you're getting paid for something, like, okay, maybe you might not be able to. But if you have the opportunity, if it's a spec script, you still want it to be the best that it can be. If that means you need to set it aside for a month or something like that, and then come back to it with not only fresh eyes, but like a renewed sense of, I can do this,
Right.
You'd be in a better position to write that well. And I've discovered that about myself when I had thought to myself, like, no, I'm done. I'm not rewriting this. It's done. And I set it aside. And then I went back and read it. I think it was a few months later. And I was like, oh, no, this needs to be rewritten. But at that point, I knew what to do with it. And I was able to make it exactly what it needed to be. And then the person that I was working with, because it was a co-writing thing, he was super excited with it. He was like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted.
Wow.
But like it took me having to set it down for a while and letting go of some of the ideas that I had, because I think that my ideas were good. It's just that that wasn't the story that my co-writer wanted to tell. And it was his idea to begin with. And so I was brought on after the fact. And so my role was to, strengthen the story to make it the best that it could be, not necessarily to change it.
Right.
And so my idea, though, was like, oh, but if we changed this part of it, which then, of course, means we have to change that part of it and then this other part of it. And then it all works, And he's like, yeah, but I don't like that part.
And you don't ever know when that inspiration is going to come. You could be driving somewhere or working on a different script. I've had that where I'm typing on something and I'm like, oh, you know what? That script I wrote 3 times ago, that doesn't have this kind of moment in it. It needs it or something,
Yeah, exactly. Like there's been times where you've sent me back a script and said, yeah, it's sweet. I think you need a bad guy in here. Like there's no adversary. And I was like, wait, but it's supposed to be a sweet movie. You're like, yeah, but where are the stakes, right? Like, and that has definitely been one of those notes that I've had on occasion. So
when you go from not seeing it to seeing it, and then I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah.
And there was one where I went and I looked back. I think I got feedback from, it may have been you or somebody else. And I was like, but that's on my list of questions. I know I asked myself that. And I went back and I looked at my list and I was like, I never answered that one. It was the one that I didn't answer.
Oh, no.
I skipped it.
Wow.
So, but I just plowed through and wrote it.
I am sure that we could talk on for like hours more about this for so many reasons. But we got to wrap up this episode. I want to thank you so much for being on the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast. This has been Shelly Paino, everyone. Is there a way that people can, find your work, or maybe if they want to hire you for anything, how do they get a hold of you?
I am on LinkedIn and Facebook, and they can go to crowningglorymovie.com. If they send a message through there, I'll get it.
We're going to have all those links in the show notes for everyone. So definitely go and check it out.
Thank you so much. This was a blast.
Yeah, same here.
I love your show.
Oh, thank you. God bless.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast. If you would like email reminders about newly released episodes and more, please sign up at faffpodcast.com/email. That's faffpodcast.com/email. Bringing filmmakers together for faith and family.
That's a wrap.